Hello, Garland Nixon here, hanging out with Larry Johnson on a Thursday afternoon. We got a good bit to talk about. We're going to check out his site, sonar21.com. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here. We're hanging out with Larry Johnson. And by the way, Larry's got a great website, and I always check out the stories and articles, and we talk about him here on this show at sonar21.com. That's Larry's site, and you'll hear a lot of people on alternative media talking about some of his various articles. They're very well sourced. He's got a history and intelligence and understanding what's happening, with what's going on with international geopolitics. Still does a lot of that work himself today on his own. So go to sonar21.com. Make sure you subscribe. And of course, don't forget the support us tab. As I always say, everybody that does this work, it ain't free, but it comes right out of our pockets to, to try to keep things going. So please go to sonar21.com, keep up on things, and make sure you support Larry. Larry, what? Jeez, Larry, welcome back. I think I'm losing my voice after a week out of town.
Yeah, your voice went on vacation, brother.
There you go.
Yeah, gotta get it off that suntan lotion,
Yeah, how about that? All right, let's get rolling. Let's start here. We got this fake kind of ultimatum 50-day thing where Trump, in my opinion, I look at it and I'm like, he just bought 50 days. That's what he did. He says, I got to buy myself some time here. How about 50 days? And to me, he ain't negotiating and struggling with the Russians. The Russians are easy. They put what they wanted in writing in 2021, for God's sake. You could have guessed back in 2008 what the hell the Russians wanted. They're pretty clear. I think his battle is with his buddies, Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton and the neocons. That a big part of this is about his struggle with the Senate neocons who are trying to do everything they can to thwart any hope he may have of getting out of this Ukraine debacle.
Well, let me give you another explanation. I'm going to read one of my readers sent this to me, and I think it makes some sense about the 50-day deadline. He says because that'll fall on September 2nd, September 3rd. That period expires on the day that Vladimir Putin's state visit to China ends. So that's when Putin is going to China, is on September 2nd, September 3rd. That's also the 80th anniversary of victory in World War III in China. And it's also, just as Russia celebrates May 9th as its victory day, China celebrates September 3rd as its victory day. That's the day after Japan signed the act of of unconditional surrender. So, you got to wonder, is that what Trump had in mind, that he's going to send a message to both Russia and China? Or alternatively, as you suggested, man, he just, pulled it out of thin air.
Well, here's another thought. Now, when I think about who want to try to thwart those days, certainly the neocons, right? What happens if Trump is negotiating with the neocons and the neocons looked and said, hey, September, yeah, that'll work. Hey, Trump, why don't you just do 50 days? You know what I mean? And maybe Trump, it's just another alternative that he didn't recognize the significance of those days, but they did. And so they negotiated a 50 days with him. Well, we don't want to take that deal, Trump, but we'll give you 50 days. So it falls on it. And then they can say, all right, Trump, well, we got to slam them. And we can do this to thwart their celebrations or whatever. I'll put it like this. It sure sounds like those dates are connected, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, watching Trump, I'm becoming more alarmed by his behavior with each passing day. And, we're starting to, peel back the onion and uncover what's really going on in his administration. So what I mean by that is Susie Wiles chief of staff. I'd never heard of her before.
Me neither.
And well, turns out she was hired as a political consultant to help run a foreign presidential campaign for a guy named Netanyahu. Huh. So now you got basically Netanyahu's campaign manager sitting with Trump's right hand every day. And we wonder why the United States is being so permissive and submissive to Israel on all things. So Israel's infiltrated right to the very heart of the Trump administration. His language, it's one thing for, if you're together with your buddies and coarse language and it's fine. But as president, particularly in public, to be as coarse and profane as Trump has been, and we're not we're talking. He's dropped the F-bomb. He's done the male bovine excrement thing several times, both in reference to Putin and in reference to his own supporters. So you really got to start questioning the judgment of this guy. That is he firing on all cylinders?
I'm with you, Larry. I've been saying, because we have something to compare, and that is his first 4 years.
Yeah.
And his first 4 years, regardless of what you think about his politics, number one, I'll say this: the first 4 years, he was under full assault the whole time. They had him on his back foot the whole time, but he seemed to be sharper in his political intuitions. He seemed to be sharper in knowing what to say, how to hold on to his base, various things like that. He just seems sharper. Yeah. And now this time around, he keeps saying things that that you look at and you say, the Trump of the first 4 years would have never made that error. The Trump of the first 4 years might have thought that, but he would have come out and said that. He wouldn't have, and this Annalena Baerbock, I keep saying he's doing her 360s. He'll say something, and then he'll do a 180, and then he'll do a 180 on that within 24 hours. And it's like he doesn't seem to remember. You just said the opposite, the absolute opposite, and then you said the opposite, and then you went back to the opposite that you said in the first place, and you're like, do you realize you're making yourself look bad?
Yes, and that was particularly highlighted on the supposed suspension of arms shipments to Ukraine that was announced. And then when Trump was asked about it, he said, who cares? It doesn't matter who made the decision. I don't know. And then, but I know everything. So it was just, somebody made that decision. And the question was Trump informed of it or not? And Trump says, yes and no. Yes, I was informed, and no, I wasn't informed. So he tries to have that's the kind of thing we're seeing. And so when you translate that into policymaking, foreign officials and foreign leaders that are dealing with Trump have got to, I can only imagine what they're saying in private. Say, because I know somebody who has met with Trump in a this very, very small setting. So there wasn't, 10s, 20 people around, much smaller, less than 10. And my friend's comment was that he's seen Trump noticeable. Trump is now noticeably aged, and you see it in his eyes and you hear it in his voice. He's not, he's not what he was 18 months ago. Maybe none of us are, but in this case, he's holding an enormous amount of responsibility, and what politician do you know would tell his base that if you believe this Jeffrey Epstein thing, you're an idiot, you're stupid, I don't want you to support me. That's essentially what he said. He did everything but call them deplorables. What politician does that? That's insane. But that's what he's doing. It's just an erratic, a lot of erratic behavior and judgment.
And it seems to me that this machine, the Lindsey Grahams and Tom Cottons of the world, they take advantage of it. They see that as something they can take advantage of to continue this fraud that, oh, it's possible we can, and this is the thing, we can somehow do something to put Ukraine in a better position to negotiate, which they've been saying from the very beginning. And from the very beginning, ever since the first time they said that, every single time Ukraine is in a worse position. And then they say, well, we got to do this to put them in a better position to negotiate. Then they're in a worse position. Oh, but we got to put them in a better. Then they're in a worse position. Then Russia says, well, we want to negotiate. They don't want to negotiate. Well, you're trying to put them in a better position to negotiate, but everything you do puts them in a worse position. And when asked to negotiate, they don't want to negotiate. And it just comes to, you guys just want to keep fighting. Basically, it's come down to fighting to the last Ukrainian, doesn't it?
Yeah. No, they just did an exchange of cadavers, army to army today. Russia received 19 dead soldiers, and Ukraine received 1,000. And that's been going on for the last several weeks. The Russians are in low double digits or single digits, and the Ukrainians are getting 4 digits. 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, 6,000. So the Russians have killed a lot of Ukrainians, and they're going to continue to do so until it's at some point the army will break. It's just like sand running out of an hourglass. It's running and running and running. Then all of a sudden it ends, and there's no more to run. That's where they're headed.
I think you're right, and I think there's just when people talk about the Europeans and the neocons, how they're responding to this. Here's what it seems like to me. They don't know what to do. They don't have a response. They're just like, well, let's just keep this thing going as long as we can. We don't know how to get out of it. We can't. If we get out of it, that's a cataclysmic loss. It just seems like desperation that says, let's try to do anything we can or make any lie or any excuse to keep it going, because they don't give a crap about the Ukrainian side anyway. It seems just like desperation. That's just whatever, anything we can do to keep it going.
I don't know if you had a chance to watch the debate at the Turning Point USA conference between Dave Smith and Josh Hammer. Dave Smith's a libertarian comedian who received quite a bit of attention following his debate on the Joe Rogan show with Douglas Murray. Smith just tore him apart. And then Josh Hammer is he's a senior editor, I think, at U.S. News and World Report or Newsweek, one of those. And on top of that, he's really a Zionist. Now, he claims he's not a neocon. But what was noteworthy about that conversation is listening to someone like Hammer, who's an intelligent guy. He's not, he's well educated. I mean, he's the editor at a major news magazine. And boy, did he drink the Kool-Aid. Israel was great. Israel's done everything wonderful. Things are going as well as, man, they're just crushing it. And that's the delusion. That delusion applies not just to what's going on with Israel and Gaza, but also what's going on in Ukraine, where they continue to insist that Ukraine they actually have a chance. Boy, they just hang in there a little longer. These Russians are going to give up. And it's simply not true. But there are no amount of facts that you can present to these people that will persuade them. The only thing that's going to persuade them is when they see the Russians actually entering Kiev and, putting Zelensky in handcuffs or carrying him out in a casket.
I think you're right. I think and the Russians know ultimately, and we've known for quite a while, the only way out of this is the Russians are going to eventually get victory, and they've been moving towards that. It's obvious. I don't know if you've been following the battle, but one of the things I keep saying is there's a lot of towns that I can't pronounce. But all I know is every single morning I wake up and the Russians are planting a new flag in a
Yeah.
town like Protrovsk or something. And people are telling me, yes, that's going to cut off the arteries for to move this across these roads and blah, blah, blah. I don't know about all that. But every morning I wake up and there's another town with a Russian flag. There's Russians marching all around it, cleaning up, moving things around, won't plant the old flag. The Europeans must not be watching, looking at Telegram like I'm watching, because
Right.
sooner or later, we know how that ends.
Well, they're also controlling information flow. And so it's deliberate lying that's going on. And so this is, it was, I know it was attributed, I think, to Ambrose Bierce, possibly Mark Twain, but I'm not sure who actually first said it, was that war is God's method of teaching Americans geography. Okay. It's the closest a lot of Americans come to ever learning a foreign language, where, they say Poltava, Dnipropetrovsk. You learn how to start pronouncing foreign names. We did it in Iraq with Balad, Baghdad, and then we did it in Afghanistan. So, we're gradually sort of building up this world knowledge because we're out trying to conquer all these other countries. But as you correctly note, if you watch the military progress of Russia particularly over the last 3 weeks, you've gone from, say, 2 months ago, they'd maybe capture a village a week. And now, as you correctly note, they're sometimes capturing 2 or 3 a day. And so that's the change. And they're getting to the tipping point where the balance of forces is so far in favor of Russia that Ukraine will be just overwhelmed and then crushed.
You're familiar with intelligence, and the Russians have, some may argue, had used the velvet glove a bit. Recently, I read that I was reading that one of these intelligence guys that had planned a bunch of intelligence attacks. He was wandering around Kiev. Some guy runs up behind him with a gun with a silencer in it, and it ended his day. I tend to think that the Russians maybe are taking the gloves off a little bit and saying, okay, you guys forgot that we had the KGB, that we kind of know how to do this stuff too. I don't know. But then there's also some people saying, well, it's possible this could have been an inside Kiev job. What do you think?
Well, both are possible. What we've seen, though, is the Russians are stepping up pressure on a variety of fronts. So, for example, 2 weeks ago, they arrested several members of an Azeri, the people out of Azerbaijan, but they are Russians of Azeri ethnicity, and Azeris like out of the Turkish realm of ethnic groups. So a bunch of them were arrested, and it was believed. I think the Russians have more than just belief; they have evidence that they had participated in helping facilitate the attacks on those Russian airfields that took place on June 1st with the drones launched from inside Russia. Then in retaliation for that, the Azeri government, its leader is called a guy named Aliyev. His father actually used to be a big KGB colonel, I believe. So Aliyev rounded up a bunch of Russian journalists that were stationed in Azerbaijan, had them arrested, and then also grabbed up a bunch of other Russians that had fled Russia back in September 2022 when Putin announced the mobilization. Well, what did Russia do in retaliation for that? They bombed 2 oil refineries in Ukraine. You're going, oh, wait a second. How are those connected? Well, it turns out that this president of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, those were his 2 personal, he owned them, oil refineries. Now, notice the Russians hadn't touched them in 3 years, 4 months, 5 months. Left them alone. Now they wiped them out, sending a message to Aliyev, basically, you keep this crap up, the next one's going to be, in your country. And so I've noticed that since that happened, you haven't, Zaliev has been sort of behaving himself. So, this Russia recognizes it's got some subversion on its borders, but it's, they're becoming a little more aggressive. And I do think one reason, though, they haven't started killing or even attacking intelligence personnel directly is I suspect several of they may have sources. Russia has recruited agents, and that's why you don't kill them.
Because they got moles. Well, yeah. And I think the other thing is this: as things get worse and worse for Kiev, and the situation gets worse, it gets easier to recruit new ones. And so as they see things going down, some of those people where there's no honor amongst thieves will start saying to the Russians, well, we know we're going to lose. How about we start making a deal? So that I've always felt like this. Kiev's crawling with Russian spies. It's probably crawling with Russian spies.
Yeah, should be.
Now, what have you heard about some kind of a resistance? One of the things that I've heard is they're blowing up these TCC centers or something, and that the Ukrainians are telling them where they are, which again, the Ukrainians don't like that. The Russians blowing them up, kind of like, hey, we're on your side. But it seems to me there's some kind of, really indigenous, I guess is the word, organic kind of resistance building up in Kiev.
I haven't seen it manifest yet in it's sporadic. So you've seen, now compared to say a year ago, you see more videos of people fighting back with trying to prevent the forcible recruitment of men off the streets. I was just thinking in terms of the whole issue of Russia sending spies and getting, looking for supporters. You're not going to send some Russian in disguise or someone who's been, a Ukrainian who's between the ages of, say, 25 and 50 into Ukraine, because they're going to get grabbed up and forced into the front line meat grinder. So I suspect that the Russians have probably been using women or older men and women as their spy to figure out what's going on. But so far, the people in Ukraine have not risen up and said, "Oh, we got to overthrow our government." Not yet, anyway. Now, let me make one other point that Russia has been very careful or precise about hitting a whole variety of targets. So on July 14th or July 15th, excuse me, Russia attacked a port complex, a port terminal called Olympics in Odessa. And it was primarily for grain shipment. Well, just the day before or 2 days before, 2 U.S. investment firms, one of those firms, Innovatus is its name, holds pension funds for Chicago teachers and Atlanta. Anyway, these two firms, got possession of this port terminal, and Russia hit it with 2 Iskander missiles the next day. So Russia's sending a message that there's a number of reports that training centers with NATO troops, primarily British or Polish or German, have been hit repeatedly. And as that's going on, you're not hearing any of the reports of the casualties back in the NATO countries right now.
That makes sense. Let's go back to your website. You got an interesting article here that I think is, I read, I think it's really good. And it's called Genocide is Self-Defense. Western Media as Accomplices to the Genocide in Gaza, We Stand Up. And I think it's interesting because I saw this thing about these people with the BBC. Again, go to sonar21.com. Genocide is Self-Defense. It's by Peter Hansler.
Yeah, Peter Hansler. Okay. He's a citizen of Switzerland, but he lives in Moscow.
Yes. So, I tell you what made me think about. I saw this thing where a bunch of people in the BBC complained and said, "Hey, we're pretty much forced to just write, stuff in favor of Israel." Talk about this article and your thoughts on it, Larry.
Well, actually, I haven't had it. He just posted it this morning.
Oh, okay.
I've been out all day and haven't had a chance to get at it. But I would encourage your readers and the viewers to go check it out, because Peter writes from the perspective of his own experience and what he's seen on the ground, both in Moscow and as both a foreigner, but as someone who's now been able to secure residency in Russia. So, he's written some really terrific stuff for me. I met him when Judge Napolitano and I were in Moscow in March. Peter's actually a friend of the judge.
Okay.
They had met previously. So we went out to dinner at a restaurant that's at the back side of the Bolshoi Ballet. And the Bolshoi is a magnificent facility structure. And that's where I met Peter. And he bought dinner for us. So he's now my best friend.
Let me ask you this. Talking about Moscow. The first Trump term, we had the craziness from Christopher Steele, and the whole P tape. Trump was in Moscow and they had compromise on him and all that foolishness, right?
Right.
Here's what's interesting. Here's what I've said. I'm not going to say Trump's compromised. I'm just going to say he acts like somebody who would be compromised when it comes to the Epstein. And I don't know if that compromise simply means they got something on him in the Epstein files. I don't mean if that compromise means he's got a lot of Zionists around him who might have helped him out with money, helped him out with, the game, legal issues over the course of time. There's a lot of rich people around you, and somebody helps you out here, helps you out there. Money makes a deal. Somebody comes along and says, "I know you can't get rid of that property and you're going to lose your shirt on it. I can help you and find your buy." All these kinds of things can make you compromise. And of course, it could be Epstein with the young girls. God only knows what. But your thoughts on this whole Epstein? This has been, who would have thought, one of the big debacles, and it was Trump running off at the mouth saying, "I'm going to be open and I'm going to let everybody know," and then all of a sudden, there's no Epstein files. I don't know what the hell everybody's talking about.
Yeah, this is so with Bill Clinton, we had Monica Lewinsky, that scandal. Once that erupted, it put a stain. Sorry for the double entendre on his presidency. With George H.W. Bush, it was "read my lips, no new taxes."
Yep.
And once he did that, once he backed on that, he never recovered. You had, there have been other scandals, with the Iran-Contra, drug down Reagan. Watergate was hung over, and Nixon. And now Epstein. Trump did this to himself. This was, there are several disturbing possibilities. The only reason I don't think that there was actual compromising information in the Epstein files. We got to get away from this notion of a list, because as you know, what we have is evidence from victims, from girls who were victimized. They provided depositions in previous cases, and in their depositions, they have identified a number of individuals, very prominent individuals. They've identified people like Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Patriots, Jamie Dimon, the owner, the chairman or CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase. There are three former Israeli prime ministers, two of them, Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert. So you've got that information there. And then you've got eyewitness, you've got testimony and depositions from staff, from chauffeurs, pilots, the flight attendants on those flights, housekeepers. etc., who also have corroborated a lot of the information for those girls. So what's really was supposed to happen was an investigation of those people. Now, I believe that if Trump's name was part of those documents, the Biden team would have released it. Now, some said, well, no, because he was wanting to protect other Democrats. Dude, you can release the information on Trump and keep the others out of it. Very easy to do. But I think it wasn't there. But that said, it was Trump himself who made an issue of this. And let's remember that it was Epstein who was arrested in 2019 and put in jail. And again, the connections in this are, they really raise some eyebrows because, number one, Bill Barr, who was the attorney general at the time that Epstein was arrested and put in prison and imprisoned in the correction center there in Manhattan. Bill Barr's dad, Don, I think his name was, had hired Jeffrey Epstein to teach at this exclusive private school called the Dalton School in New York City back in the late 70s, early 80s. And what's really interesting about that is that Epstein he wasn't a college graduate. Now, this was an exclusive school that prided itself on having instructors that were Ivy League grads, Harvard, Yale, Princeton. And then you hire this guy who's a college dropout. And then the next thing you know, a few years later, he's all of a sudden worth hundreds of millions of dollars and managing money for a couple of very wealthy people, Lex Wexner, who was, of Victoria's Secret fame. Well, for Trump to say that this is, quote, a hoax, well, tell that to Prince Andrew, who had to pay a settlement out to one of the girls that said he forced her to have sex with him because he paid the money. Tell that it's a hoax to J.P. Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon's outfit, who was charged with conspiracy for facilitating the sex trafficking of Jeffrey Epstein because J.P. Morgan Chase provided all the cash, laundered the cash for him, handled his bank account. That's not hoax. Those are real crimes. These are real people. So here is Trump, and is he gone crazy to pretend that this doesn't exist, or what are we looking at? Was he told, look, if you pursue this, if you continue to pursue this, it's going to expose an intelligence operation? But let's remember, when Epstein was arrested in 2019, Donald Trump was president. Bill Barr was his attorney general. Oh, and one other part of the triangle to connect. My business partner, we're sort of retired now, but he's still pursuing a case against the Clinton Foundation for tax evasion, tax fraud. It's going to go to trial the 1st of December, actually. But in collecting evidence against what because the Clintons use their foundation as a money laundering place and a way to enrich themselves without paying taxes. John acquired evidence from Norway, and the government of Norway gave him the flight logs of planes, of Jeffrey Epstein's planes. Why? Well, because on one of those flight logs, one of those flights into Norway from the island was Bill Clinton. But also on the plane was Bill Gates and James Comey. And who was one of the lawyers at the Southern District of New York involved with the Epstein case? Well, that would be Maureen Comey, daughter of James Comey. Garland,
the Ghislaine Maxwell case,
yeah,
and the Diddy case.
Do you believe in coincidence? I sure as hell don't.
Yeah, the Ghislaine Maxwell case, the P. Diddy case, all of these cases, it's always with the Comey. Here's something for I've always been very suspicious. Let me show you something, Larry, real quick. Okay. Monica Lewinsky, you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Linda Tripp was the big figure there. She was the one who, oh, by the way, so this is her obituary, right? Linda Tripp obituary. You go to here. Linda graduated from high school in East Hanover, New Jersey, and went to work as a, quote, secretary in Army Intelligence, Fort Meade, Maryland, where NSA is. So she was in Army Intelligence in Fort Meade. She was at NSA.
Yeah.
I know, because I live in Anne Arundel County, and
yeah.
NSA is the largest employer in Anne Arundel County. And when people say, either if they say, where do you work? Department of Defense in Fort Meade, or Army Intel Fort Meade, that means you work for NSA. She worked for NSA. Where did Linda Tripp, where was she working at the time that she met and befriended and
Monica.
started recording Monica Lewinsky's? She was working at the Pentagon. Her office was at the Pentagon. And Monica Lewinsky was taken out of the White House and put in, as big as the Pentagon is, put in a desk right over by there, right by her. Oh, one other thing, Monica Lewinsky, let me add one other thing. Let's see. Watch this. Screen. I wonder where Netanyahu. This is the Times of Israel. Crap, I hate that. Forget that. Times of Israel, right? Netanyahu said to have offered Lewinsky tapes for Pollard. New critical book of the Clinton family claims that Israel tapped White House phones, blackmailed presidents with recording of them. So Netanyahu had the recordings.
Yeah.
So apparently all of these conversations with Linda Tripp, she was just recording everything. She was working in the Pentagon. She had worked with NSA and Army Intelligence, which they hid, and she was recording. But I mean, Larry, if I called you to talk about, hey, what's happening, buddy? How's it going? Blah blah blah. I ain't recording 20 hours of our conversation. I'm not recording 20 seconds of our conversation. Number one,
right?
And number two. So they had all the recordings between Clinton and Lewinsky. Meanwhile, all the recordings in the White House, Netanyahu had them. I can see if you said the CIA, some guy that worked in the basement, whatever, the computer guy, Netanyahu had them.
Yeah.
It's so obvious that Lewinsky, the whole Lewinsky thing, for whatever reason, was a CIA Mossad operation. And Epstein was in and out of the White House 19 times. It is my suspicion that he was in and out of the White House because he was running this thing.
Yeah, very well could be. And
doesn't Monica Lewinsky, I've read that she went to Israel every year.
Her
father's big, very, very rich Zionist guy as her father. That's how she got in the first place.
Well, it wouldn't, and what would be the purpose of it for Mossad? Well, it's very simple. They wanted to make sure that Clinton didn't force them into any kind of agreement with the Palestinians that would have forced Israel to give up any land or actually reach a peace agreement with the Palestinians that was not amenable to Israeli interests. So, yeah, I understand why they did it, and I'm always fascinated by they do run pretty good intelligence operations, but they're far from perfect. Just like we saw in the aftermath of the Munich Olympics, when they were going to go out and assassinate all the Palestinians involved, the Black September members, and they ended up killing a couple of innocent people, and they screwed it up. But in this case, they had Clinton wrapped up, and Ryan Dawson, who's done a lot of original research on this. I know Whitney Webb gets credit, but she took a lot of stuff from Ryan. And his point is he thinks that the main goal of this operation, particularly with Epstein, was to get if you will, control over a bunch of billionaires. Because normally billionaires, if you're a billionaire, who can control you? You got the money. You're sort of your own god. However, if you get them compromised, sexually compromised, then all of a sudden you got some leverage, or you can use it as leverage or insurance that they'll cooperate and play along. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. It wasn't, they were not targeting so much politicians to blackmail them, because if you get the money source that provides those, keeps those politicians lubricated, you're going to control the politician without having to go out and directly subvert them. So I think there's some real truth to that.
Yeah. What do you think about how that affects, there were a lot of people who, I think there's a lot of people who are feeling, I've called Trump the, Republican Obama. Obama came in and he told all these people he was going to change. People believed him, and he sounded like he meant, oh, I'm going to do all this. And it was all a fraud. He did the opposite of everything he promised he was going to do. Yeah. And now Trump comes in, oh, I'm going to be the peace president. I'm going to bring peace. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. You know what I mean? I'm going to everything, JFK, MLK, all these, everybody knows that, they were involved. It tells you who's involved in all that crap. But I'm going to do that. And then he gets in office and it's like, never mind. Screw these people. They're a bunch of jerks for even asking. And, this absurd position, I think it's incalculable, the amount of harm that's been done to Donald Trump politically.
Yeah. Well, when you've got Candace Owens, she's a tough lady, young lady at that, but a tough young lady. Tucker Carlson, Matt Walsh, even the pro-Israel, pro-Zionist Megyn Kelly, and Joe Rogan, all going, whoa, wait a minute. And then again, for Trump to just go out and tell the people that are part of his base that if you really believe this about Jeffrey Epstein, I don't want you to be part of my base. I don't want you to support me. It's like, are you crazy? I mean, are you absolutely crazy? Because it's not like you're sitting on 70% popularity. He's at like 45% right now. And I bet you he's going to head lower. Because I know that if you would have asked me 2-3 months ago, hey, are you in favor, or you feel Trump's doing a pretty good job? I would have said, yeah, generally, yeah. Now, no. He needs to be removed. I'd go that far. And, I think the Republicans in a year or so, I don't think Trump's going to recover from this. I think this is going to be like his version of Watergate, or whatever you want to call it, because he's destroyed people's trust in him, that they now know that he's a liar, and not only a liar, but gaslighting in the most obscene ways. This is what he should have said. And because I saw Riley Gaines, she's another one, she has been very rah about Trump on the whole men and women's sports issue. But she came out and speaking out against Trump today. When you're losing people like that woman and the others that I cited earlier, Alex Jones too, boy, he's lit up. Trump may watch Fox News and get smoke blown up his ass all day, but that's, they got 3-4 million people watching that. Not a lot, not a big audience. All this other social media has much broader reach, and I think that when the history is written, they'll look at Trump and say, what did Bibi Netanyahu tell you, or what did Ratcliffe tell you, or what did Mossad tell you that scared you off? Now, we've got several possible stories. We got the story we were fed that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide, but hanging himself but he had a broken neck, so it's a little tough to, when you're dropped through a trap door and the rope snaps, that'll break your neck. Sitting down on a bed like so and trying to hang yourself, that's not how you break a neck. So he suicided himself. However, there's some problems with that story, because there are photographs that were taken of the body that was wheeled into the emergency room at the hospital in New York City of Jeffrey Epstein, and you've got a side profile. Well, when you compare the profile of that face with Jeffrey Epstein's face, the nose doesn't match and the ears don't match. So was a body substituted for Epstein to get him out, a Mossad rescue, if you will. That's a possibility. I was talking with a friend that was buddies with the son of Lucky Luciano, and Lucky Luciano staged his death in Venice, Italy, but when he was like 70 years old. But he lived to be like 103. Is that what they did for Epstein? Because he was an intelligence asset, and you got to come back and say, what was it that triggered them going after Epstein in 2019? I mean, all these crimes have been out there for ages. And my favorite one of this is you got the irony is Alan Dershowitz calling for, there probably needs to be more investigation of this. And Dershowitz is on tape saying that, well, he never went to the island. He did go to Jeffrey Epstein's mansion, and he did get a massage, but, and he says this on tape, it's not me, I kept my underwear on. Yeah.
If you got to say that, something's not right.
Yes. It just, I got a massage. I got my shoulders rubbed like Bill did. Oh, yeah. Boy, I kept my underwear on. Oh, so he's talking about something else. So these, again, there's the tie between Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein, and Epstein's in fact had his first meetings with Robert Maxwell in the 80s. And that's important because before Maxwell died, Maxwell was a Mossad operative. And when he was found dead, and the belief is that actually he was killed by Mossad because he was trying to blackmail him. Still, they had a state funeral in Israel for him. They've only done that for one other foreigner, and that was James Jesus Angleton after he died, because of the role he played in helping Israel get a nuclear weapon. And what's interesting is here's Jeffrey Epstein, who's been doing yeoman's work for Mossad. To my knowledge, they didn't hold a state funeral for him. Maybe that means he isn't really dead. The third option, he threatened Donald Trump with he was trying to get something out of Trump, and Trump wouldn't give it. And he threatened to release incriminating, damning information because he and Trump had a long relationship. There are pictures of Trump and him ogling two little girls, 3 little girls dressed up as Buffalo Bills cheerleaders. It was on TikTok. So, did he do that? And then did Trump have him arrested, put in jail, and then whacked? That's a possibility. So, this is, and all of this is, there's some speculation in there, certainly, but there's a lot of actual evidence undergirding it to where you're going to say, call this a hoax. Is just mind. Well, it's stupid because it's simply what they call the Streisand effect. Remember years ago where she tried to get pictures of her whole house off the internet. And in fact, they just drove up people wanting to see the house. Way to go, Trump. Heck of a job.
Well, I felt for years, I felt this. Bill Barr's dad was the guy that hired Epstein at the Dalton School. This is as you know, Bill Barr's dad had, his long connections to intelligence. Bill Barr, he worked with Reagan, and he worked with a lot of the Iran hostages stuff. He was an intelligence guy, right? I felt because Trump's AG left and Barr came in. I felt Barr was brought in to handle the Epstein problem. I felt like that's why they brought Bill Barr in to dispense with the Epstein problem. However they decided, pretend that he was dead, haul him back to Israel or his island or wherever they took him off to if he's still alive, which wouldn't shock me a bit. But that's why they brought Barr in, to fix that, to clean that up.
Yeah, may very well be. You see, I was not aware that Barr's father had been at the agency, but that he was, I guess he dated back to OSS days.
Yeah. Yes.
And so here he is now, the headmaster of this school. And, with someone like, they do spotting and assessment as part of a recruitment process. So, that's where, and how Epstein came onto his radar. That'd really be an interesting question or mystery to solve. Because Epstein couldn't just show up and, hey, with a help wanted ad, let me apply for it. Hey, I'm not a college grad. I don't come with any of the credentials.
Yeah, you couldn't. Where could you teach without? You can't teach at an elementary school in the state I'm in without a college graduate. You know what I mean? Yeah. Let's see. What date was Epstein arrested? Date Epstein arrested. Let me see. Because that's important. Let's see. July 6, 2019, he was arrested, right?
Yeah, and he died like August 19th or something.
And Bill Barr became February 14th, 2019. March, April, May, June, July. So 5 months before he was arrested, Barr came in. Interesting. Well, listen to this. November of 2018, the Miami Herald revisits the handling of the Epstein case in a series of stories focusing on the role of Acosta, who by this point is President Donald Trump. So November, the case blows up. That's when the case first blew up, November of 2018, when the whole story came out about Alex Acosta, right?
Right.
So that's November, December, January, February. Alex Acosta's story blows up, right? 3 months later, Barr comes in. It almost seems to me like they're like, okay, the Epstein story blew up. Bring this guy in, he handles it. And then interestingly enough, 3 months after the story finally blows up, the guy whose father hired Epstein suddenly becomes the attorney general. And he's now tasked with handling the whole Epstein case. It's his. It is put in his lap. It is given to him. He's in charge of everything. And he visited Epstein like days before Epstein died. That timeline seems to make a little sense too, doesn't it?
Yep. Well, and then one more fun fact. Bill Barr's dad, Donald, he converted from Judaism to Catholicism. Man. Yeah.
So, I mean, it gets pretty obvious after a while when you're looking at this that all of these things seem to make sense. Yeah. As soon as they saw they had a problem, they brought in the fixer. And what was interesting was this. If you remember, there was a whole bunch of articles, the New York Times and the Washington Post, and they called Barr the, quote, the fixer. But they said he was Trump's fixer and Trump was in trouble and he was the fixer for Trump. Well, it looks like they were actually kind of telling on themselves because Barr was the fixer, but he was brought in as the fixer for the Epstein stuff. He focused on the Epstein stuff. He got that dealt with, and that was that. Wow, that's interesting when you put that timeline together.
Well, and then add to it Bill Barr's prior experience at the CIA. Remember,
Yeah.
he was at the Central Intelligence Agency before he was at Department of Justice.
Interesting. Yeah, and you know what that brings out? It's like this is a game they play. You know, it just came out that the shadowy CIA figure, Joe Anides,
Right.
that guy was meeting with what's his name, like a few weeks, but with the guy, the alleged lone gunman who killed JFK. Joe Anides was meeting with him like weeks or months before that.
Oh yeah,
right?
with Lee Harvey Oswald. Yeah,
Lee Harvey Oswald. But what's interesting about that is later on, when Congress was looking into it, and they said to the CIA, "We want you to send somebody to help us." The CIA sent Joe Anides.
Yes.
The CIA sent the guy who was meeting with the supposed presidential killer to work with the Congress to help them look into the JFK assassination, but they didn't tell Congress that this guy was involved in it, which tells me this: Barr was probably involved in that. He was in the center of that crap when he was with the CIA.
Yeah. It was what Trump at least released some of the documents that came the JFK files, which showed without a doubt that Lee Harvey Oswald was an asset of the CIA. He was not some foreign agent working for another government. He was recruited through a program that James Jesus Angleton started in the late 50s to take, to get single military personnel, guys, and have them defect or fake a defection to the then Soviet Union, and in hopes that they could penetrate one of their intelligence organizations. And that was Lee Harvey Oswald. And the program was actually run out of a place, a CIA base that's in North Carolina, that is it's classified. So it's again, I find it, when you get all these ties, and here's Barr, who was, he was, my understanding, he was an analyst at the CIA from 73 to 77. And then it was during that period that I guess he went to law school, got his legal degree, and then he switched from being an analyst to working in the office of general counsel. But then he switched over and got into Department of Justice. But you got to, Barr, Barr was directly involved with this, and in light of his father's prior association, and not only that, Barr's father wrote a really sick science fiction book that involved predatory sex on underage girls. So you got to say, what's going on with Dad? I think just thinking about what would you think if your father was writing stuff like that? I'd be creeped out.
Or even the Lex Wessner, Victoria's Secret. Let's see, what is it? Putting a bunch of young girls in lingerie. You know what I mean? And then the Victoria's Secret models are like teenage girls. The whole thing, all of it stinks to high heaven. But here's the thing about it. And this is, the last thing we'll say here, we're just about out of time. All of that stuff screams at you. Alex Acosta says, yeah, they told me it was intelligence. All of that screams at you. And then Trump thoroughly discredits himself by saying it was a hoax, it was a lie. You people, you're jerks. How dare you believe in that? Oh, it's just like Russiagate. He completely, part of it's not just that he lied to people. It's that he discredited himself by telling everybody who looked at that thing and said, that stinks to high heaven. And for him saying, you're crazy if you think that stinks to high heaven. Everything's fine. Nothing to see here. I think he discredited himself in a way that's bigger than just a person who lies.
Yeah. No, I would agree. It's shocking, really, that he would be so self-destructive of his legacy. This is he's not going to recover from this. It's really done permanent damage, because the only he can't, they can try to produce a nice lie and cover up, but there are too many facts out there, particularly about the intelligence ties to Mossad through Ghislaine's Maxwell's father, number one. But again, Epstein himself had bragged about it. So they're trying to cover up what was, I think, a joint Mossad CIA operation of some sort. We'll see.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Larry. Everybody, before we go, let me remind you all, let me remind everyone, one of the ways that those of us who are in the alternative media universe or sphere, whatever you want to call it, one of the ways we're able to stay on top of things is going to a number of websites. And here's one of them. It's Larry's. It's called sonar21.com. You'll hear a lot of us reference articles there, reference stories there, a lot of good stuff there. Go to sonar21.com, regularly check out all the latest stories. Make sure you subscribe. There you go. Become a subscriber. Put your email addresses on there. And of course, you can do PayPal, BitChute, Patreon, or Buy Me a Coffee. But it's very important that you do everything you can to help keep Larry going, to help keep this important information coming forward, so that we can all continue to be knowledgeable of what's happening and keep up with everything. Larry, thanks a lot for your hard work, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks, my brother. I appreciate your kindness.
Wonderful. Everybody, make sure you share this on all your social media platforms. That's important. Follow me on Rockfin, Rumble, and Telegram. If you can afford Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee into that stuff, that's great. Even if you can't, the important thing to do, share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.